I have spent the last month shooting similar photos on my 2 cameras that I own. These cameras are not the same. One of them is $3,000. This is the Sony FX2, which frankly I bought to use for this channel, but also to test my hand at photography. The other one didn't cost me anything. This is the Canon PowerShot SX130. This camera was gifted to me a few years ago. It was my first digital camera. You can't buy it new anymore, but if I had to guess, it would probably go for $100, if that. So like I said, I have been shooting similar photos for the past month with these 2 cameras just for fun to see if the older Canon can hold any type of value with the specs of newer cameras like the FX2. Now I know what you're thinking. Obviously the Sony FX2 is going to have sharper images, it's going to have better dynamic range, but honestly, I think you're going to be surprised at how decent some of the photos that the Canon PowerShot can produce still. Before we get into any of the photos, let's take a quick rundown of the specifications of each of these cameras to see how they match up. The Sony FX2 has a 33 megapixel full frame sensor. It is an interchangeable lens camera, so obviously your image quality is going to be different depending on what lens you have. For this video, all the photos were taken on a 50mm prime f2.5 Sony lens. It shoots 4K video up to 60 frames per second. It shoots JPEGs, of course. It also shoots in RAW, compressed or uncompressed. The shutter speed can be 30 seconds at the maximum and 1/8000th of a second at the minimum. This is one of the latest cameras from Sony. I think it still might be the latest. It was released in 2025. Okay, now on to the Canon. This camera released all the way back in 2010. It is a 16-year-old camera. It has a 12.1 megapixel 1/2.3 inch sensor. I think that's how you say it, 1/2.3 inch. 1/2.3 inch. One very interesting part of this camera is its fixed 28 to 336 millimeter lens. It is a huge advantage to get that type of reach from this small of a camera that's so easy to throw in your pocket, in a bag, when you go anywhere. You really don't have to worry about it, but you still get such a far-reaching shot. The maximum aperture for the lens is 3.4 at the wide end and 5.6 at the far end. One big negative is that it only shoots in JPEG. There is no RAW shooting option for this camera, so you are very limited in editing. I mean, you can still edit a JPEG, but it does put a little bit more pressure to get the right shot in the moment and not having that flexibility in post to change the artistry of your photo. Its longest shutter speed is 15 seconds and the shortest is 1/2500. It's got a relatively normal photography form factor. It has a dial that you can choose aperture priority, shutter speed priority, unlike the FX2, which comes in handy. The last thing I'll say about this camera is it does have a built-in flash, which is becoming a bit of a trend right now with pocket-sized cameras. Unfortunately, my PowerShot's flash is broken, so I was not able to test or use that in any of the photos. All right, now let's dive into some of the photos between these 2 cameras. First up here, we've got this Gnome photo. Right away, I'm just gonna say there is not a huge difference, just side to side, that I can see a crazy difference in image quality. Okay, listen, if you want to pixel peep, you can pixel peep all day on the Sony picture. It's gonna be sharper. You can zoom in, you can get a sharp image, cropping in a lot with the 33 megapixel sensor. But it's a bigger sensor, so duh. But I mean, if we're just opening up this file, not zooming in, side to side, like, it's really not that big a difference. I think the color rendering in the Canon is pretty good. For this old, smaller sensor, the colors are pretty solid. Okay, here we have a wide shot of a river and a log and a cement block in the foreground. One thing I'm noticing is the Canon photo, the highlights are really blown out. The clouds look they don't really even look like clouds so much anymore. I took this at 1/800 shutter speed, f4, ISO 80, so nothing screams to me that the highlights would be blown out One thing with the Sony image though is the background is a lot blurrier, but that's just due to the aperture being at f2.5. But even with that, the quote-unquote subject is not the sharpest in this photo, the log here. The dynamic range in this photo though is definitely coming through a lot better. The clouds look really nice. But with this Canon though, I mean, you know, we're getting a fairly decent image. Apart from the highlights being a bit blown out on the Canon photo, I wouldn't say that's an awful photo compared to the Sony, but I would give the clear win to the Sony here. Okay, this is an interesting one. For this photo, I set both apertures of the cameras to f4 just to see the depth of field differences we get when focusing on this side of this bridge, walkway, whatever you want to call it. So on the Sony photo, the details that we're getting here at the focus point is really unbelievable. I mean, it's not a riveting subject, but just the detail is incredible. Really good depth of field here when we're focusing on the close side of the bridge. On the Canon though, we don't really see much of a fall off in the bridge, maybe a little bit in the forest way in the back, but not much. So at f4, this camera is not giving you much blurriness at all. In fact, I mean, the the most wide open aperture the Canon can shoot is 3.4. So as far as artistic bokeh, the Sony obviously is going to give you much more of an opportunity to do that. Again though, with the Canon, as I was going through these photos, like, yes, it is sharper on the Sony, clearly, when you pixel peep that much, but like the detail is still there. You're still going to be able to get a pretty good crisp image with this tiny camera, which I think is pretty awesome. All right, on to the next photo. Here we have just a simple shot of somewhat of a path, you know, going up into the woods here. And right away I'm noticing just the dynamic range struggles of the Canon. The shadows are very cloudy, not very sharp, and the highlights again in the sky are pretty blown out in some spots. So any composition where it's sort of pushing the limits of its dynamic range, it will struggle to capture a clean image. On the Sony here, we have the sky through the trees. You can see the clouds. It's not blown out. And if you zoom into the shadows, you can still get some good detail there as well. This is a pretty random image, but I secretly kind of love it. I like the two trees that sort of lead you down this path and the light that is seeping through. So, big W. This is also a cool image, nice little path next to the river. And honestly, I'm seeing very similar things here. There's not too much to say. And again, this speaks to the image quality that you can still get from old small sensor cameras like the PowerShot SX130. It was free to me, it was a gift, but you know, something like this, it's pretty incredible that even now you can get pretty decent images from it. Obviously most people have phones nowadays, so most people are just gonna have by default a pretty good camera in their pocket, but I think it's still fun to carry around some type of small camera to have a little bit more of an artistic approach to taking photos. If we zoom in here, I mean, it's not sharp this zoomed in, but this tiny little cement block that's at the end of the path, you can see clearly there. Now let's try it on the Canon. A little bit more pixely, sure, but it is still holding somewhat of a candle to the sharpness of the Sony. A very dim candle, but there's a candle. And dare I say, I like the color rendition of the Canon's photo a little better. I think the sky looks a little better, this light blue color. The cloud looks really nice, and in the Sony, the cloud is kind of not there, so I'm not sure what's going on there, but I think the Canon photo is nice. Alright, who's ready for a Sony dub? Someone had built a teepee on the side of this path, so I decided to test the bokeh blurry background capabilities of the cameras here. The lens on the Sony only goes down to 2.5, but that is still good enough to focus on this log, and even the log right next to it is getting pretty blurry and the background is completely blurred out. It's looking really nice. On the Canon, taken at the lowest aperture or highest, I don't know, whatever, you know what I mean, wide open, f3.4. I did focus on the same log here, but all the logs are pretty much not blurred, and even the background way in the distance is not particularly blurred. I can still make out the ripples in the water and trees in the background, so the bokeh on this camera, there really is none. All right, another quick little bokeh test. Here I am focused on the log sort of straight through the center here. Again, there really is no bokeh on the Canon camera. The log right in the foreground is not blurred, and the background is not particularly blurred either. In the Sony though, you can see the difference, the blurriness in the front, the bottle is blurry, and straight through the center, this log is sharp. In the background, it's blurring out a little bit, not too much, but a little bit more than the Canon, I'd say. Again though, I do have to say, the Canon color rendition is looking pretty nice. I like the greens here, the bottle and the moss on the ground. The Sony, maybe it's because it's blurred, but the green is looking a bit dull on the bottle. Okay, this next one is going to be interesting. Here I am stood between two telephone lines running adjacent to each other. I don't see too much of a difference just looking at the photo, not zooming in or anything. I will say the Canon photo looks pretty nice right out of camera. The highlights are not blown out here. The sky looks great. Once you zoom in though, it's not looking very sharp at all. With the Sony though, we zoom in and you can make out these park benches way in the distance, probably 200-300 meters away from me here. But here is where the versatility of the fixed lens comes in handy on the Canon. In this photo, I'm stood in the same spot and I've just zoomed in to the max with the Canon, and I pretty much have identical sharpness. So sort of an interesting juxtaposition. Using a prime lens on the FX2, you can get sharpness way far in the distance in a landscape type of shot. But with the Canon, I have the versatility of the fixed lens zoomed all the way into 336 millimeters, and I'm getting similar sharpness that I do zoomed in on the Sony photo that I have here with the Canon. I think that sort of shows that both of these cameras are impressive in their own right. The Sony's sensor able to capture sharpness from this far is awesome, and the Canon's ability to just hit a little zoom rocker on the camera. I don't have to carry around a big chunky zoom lens to get pretty decent sharpness from a crazy distance. Again, this is the same spot. I'm stood about 200-300 meters away from these park benches, and in the Canon photo, it's coming through pretty sharp. So all around, good stuff. Similar idea here. I took a wide shot with the Sony and I got these ducks, and you know, I can zoom in and get them decently sharp. And I have a zoomed in photo taken of the ducks with the Canon. I'd say a similar sharpness between the photos. In the Canon photo, you can even see this duck speaking a word. What word do you think he spoke? Write it in the comments below. Okay, this next photo I will say is a clear Sony winner. I think the color rendition is awesome, but I would probably lend that to the depth of field abilities of the FX2 as well as the dynamic range. I didn't do as well of a job composing the Canon photo, to be fair, but a clear winner here for the Sony camera. This is actually one of my favorite photos I have taken since I got my FX2, so shout out to the FX2. And that is all the comparison shots I have. It was a lot of fun going around and taking a look at different types of subjects and composition and seeing how the cameras could face up against each other. Obviously, like I said at the beginning, the Sony is gonna outclass the Canon in a lot of aspects of photography, and I knew that going in, but it was still a lot of fun to do this test. And I mean, it has to be said, the photos that you can get from a 16-year-old camera with a 1/2.3 inch sensor is still pretty awesome. don't be allured by these new cameras that can do all these crazy things unless you're doing super niche wildlife or sports photography. You don't need a god-slaying camera. The experience and creativity that you get from carrying around a compact camera like the Canon PowerShot is really fun. Honestly, I would recommend it to anybody. The creative and artistic aspects that you get from bringing around a dedicated camera is honestly half the fun of photography. And I am going to continue shooting with my old Canon PowerShot. I think it's just fun to bring around such an old camera, and I'll continue to see what type of images I can get. I know this was a big switch up from the last video that I put out, but welcome to Liminal Planet. You never really know what's gonna happen next. But that just about wraps it up. If you're still here watching, I appreciate it. I love you. Shout out to my loyal Planeteers. I hope you have a fantastic day, and I will see you in the next video. Peace out. Wait. I forgot one thing. Video. The video is not great.